Or it's like the same thing with learning to ride the bicycle. Once we've embodied the skill and we can ride the bicycle, then if we start thinking about what to do and how to do it, it will just get in our way. Have you ever noticed how sometimes the harder you try to achieve something, the more you push it away? For example, if you really want to get some sleep and you're laying awake looking at the watch, and the harder you try, the more stressed you become. Or trying to remember a name, struggling to remember something that just slipped your mind, and the more you struggle, the further it fades away. Or the same thing when we're trying too hard to make a first good impression, that we tend to get tense and just anxious, and it doesn't really serve us, and we do get in our own way a lot like this. Or we get impatient, trying to force things to happen, like wanting a plant to grow faster by pulling on its stem or trying to overwater the plant. It doesn't help. So sometimes what we need to do is simply to relax our striving. And so the plant will grow optimally if we simply provide the conditions for it and then step back and give it space and time to do what it's doing naturally. And the same thing happens with our bodies. If we can simply relax into our bodies, the intelligence of the body will find a way to balance the nervous system, the hormones, and the whole physiology, and we'll be able to relax and fall asleep. And same with our mind. If we can step out of our own way and let the magic of the neurochemistry in the brain and the mind simply do its thing, then what we often find is that the right solution, or that fact that we need to know, spontaneously presents itself. But this way of relaxing and releasing striving, it doesn't come naturally to most of us because we have this deeply ingrained habit to be doing. We feel that we can't trust the way things happen, that unless we take it upon ourselves and we use our intellect to try to create order, to create control, to grasp, to strive, to achieve, then things will fall apart. We won't get what we need and we won't achieve anything. And we even approach meditation in this same way, right? We try to strive to achieve non-striving. We try to make an effort to relax, or we try to grasp and understand and achieve insights or even enlightenment. So basically we're caught in what psychologist Erich Fromm called the having mode. We're looking externally for things and possessions and achievements and goals and even other people to meet our needs. And while these are all legitimate needs in their own context, we do need to have things. We need to have water, food, security, whatever. But these things will never satisfy what he calls our being needs, because these are two fundamentally different sets of human needs, and they are achieved and addressed through different operating modes. And so we often operate in what Vervaeke calls a modal confusion, where we're using the having mode in order to achieve our being needs. And it's simply the wrong strategy. And so this is what the attitude of non-striving is pointing toward this dropping back into the being mode. And this is what mindfulness is about. Sati is remembering what it's like to inhabit the being mode. And we all know what it feels like. That's why it's called remembering. After all, as the saying goes, we are human beings. We're not human doings or human havings. So not only is this state of non-striving deeply peaceful and healing, but it can also be a way for us to access creativity and effortless action. And this is what in Taoism is called Wu Wei. It's often translated as non-doing. But it doesn't mean that we cease all activity, that we curl up on the couch and let life pass by, but perhaps it's better translated as non-striving, or perhaps effortless action. And Slingerland, he describes it this way in an article. For a person in Wu Wei, proper and effective behavior flows automatically and spontaneously from the self, without the need for thought or exertion. So this effortless action it closely resembles what in psychology is referred to as flow, this state of being in the zone. And this has been shown to increase the sense of meaning in our lives, this experience. And it's also been shown to be crucial in any type of performance or artistic expression or creation. So in a sense, this non-striving is about flow, but it's not about occasional peak states in domains in which we're experts, but it's more of a general way of life, regardless of the domain. It's a way of life in which, rather than trying to use our intellect to, force things in a certain direction based on our self-centered perspective, we're acting in accordance with how things naturally tend to unfold. So we're trying to create as little resistance as possible. And this is exemplified in the parable of the butcher. It's an ancient Taoist story told by Chuang-Tzu, where he talks about this legendary butcher in ancient China. And the emperor gets to know of this butcher, and he comes to visit the village, and he asks the butcher, so tell me, how often do you need to sharpen your knife? And the butcher, he replies that, well, most butchers, they cut right through the bones, and so they have to actually throw their knife away after a year. But a good butcher, he cuts right next to the bone, and so he actually only has to sharpen the knife every year. But he said, I find the space in between the bone and the muscle, and so my knife actually, my blade never touches anything at all, so I never have to sharpen it. And then when I get to a particularly difficult joint, where there's ligaments and tendons, and I simply stop and I wait. And then all of a sudden, when that little space presents itself, I just flick the knife and the whole muscle falls off the bone. So this is effortlessness. This is spontaneous action or non-striving, wu wei. And these situations is what Lane Arye calls Taoist butcher moments. When we meet a challenge in our lives where the solution isn't obvious to us, or we have some challenge, what we typically do is we get impatient and we simply cut right through the bones and the ligaments and the tendons, to continue the metaphor. But if we, in contrast, can relax and find patience, we often find that space, that solution can present itself to us spontaneously. So this type of non-striving, it may feel unrealistic or impractical to many of us. We can't really just let go, can we? We might fall into passivity or hedonism. We might just end up not doing anything if we don't strive. But the point is that we get good at what we practice. And like we've said, we've practiced a lot of the having mode and the incessant doing, that habit. But we haven't really been taught to practice non-striving. And this is why traditions like Zen and perhaps in particular various forms of martial arts, they emphasize practice and discipline to cultivate spontaneity. And it may sound contradictory to practice spontaneity is like striving for non-striving or something like this. But let's use a framework to try to make some sense out of this. And this is the framework of ShuHaRi. It's a Japanese art of mastery that's applied in areas ranging from martial arts to tea drinking. And I've personally seen it applied in agile software development as well. And it outlines 3 phases of mastery, where the first phase is shu, and it literally means to protect or to obey. And this is where we're learning the discipline, we're learning the tradition, we're mimicking our master, and we're learning from the elders. And then, hopefully many years later, we'll reach the second stage, which is ha. And this literally means to break or detach, because at this point we've mastered the technique, we know the tradition, and so we can start breaking from tradition. We start finding our individual expression, and we can even add improvements. This is kaizen. But obviously this requires that we have a strong foundation in the first phase. And the third stage, ri, That literally means to leave or to transcend. So here we transcend the technique and the tradition altogether, and we no longer rely on any form of technique or form at all. We simply, the actions just flow through us. And then occasionally we come back to the first stage, to practice humility and to protect the tradition. So rather than this being a linear process with a definite goal at the end, it's more of a, we move through these phases in more of a cycle. Another way to try to make sense of this is through the language of neuropsychology, where they differentiate between two types of cognition. You may know this from Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, for example, where he talks about System 1 as being this fast, intuitive, subconscious, hot cognition, and System 2 being this deliberate and more slow, conscious way of thinking. This is the cold cognition. And to quote Slingerland again, he says that Western thought has strongly emphasized System 2, or cold cognition, and based their models of ethics on the exertion of cognitive control. So this, I think, might help explain why we're so well trained in the having mode and in the doing and in using our intellect to control and grasp things. And so what the attitude of non-striving is pointing towards is something like studying and learning and recognizing the fundamental principles and techniques of any art or any domain or any skill, or perhaps even the principles of nature itself, and then to practice that and embody those principles, to integrate them right into our nervous system, so that we can increasingly start getting out of our own way, and we can start increasingly rely on this fast and subconscious and intuitive intelligence of the body. But first, we of course need to master the techniques, and we need to practice, right? We can't expect to be jamming away on the guitar and expressing ourselves creatively before we learn the scales and the fundamentals. Or it's like the same thing with learning to ride the bicycle. Once we've embodied the skill and we can ride the bicycle, then if we start thinking about what to do and how to do it, it will just get in our way. So to conclude, this attitude of non-striving, it can help us live a more effortless life. And it can remind us of our natural state of being, which is inherently peaceful, and which can also help increase the sense of belonging and meaning in our lives. And this is something that I think many of us can use in these times where what we're going through has been, it's been termed the meaning crisis or the meta crisis. So on an individual level, I think it's an important attitude, and also looking around us in our contemporary world at corporate cultures, levels of stress and anxiety, of medication usage, of unreasonable expectations that we put on ourselves, of this constant striving to possess new things and resource utilization. You name it. I think, at least looking through my lenses, I think we can use some reminder of this attitude of non-striving on a collective and societal level as well.